So, Carrie, it's all yours.
All right. Thanks, Giannis. Hello, everyone. So before we get started, I'll just introduce myself if I can get my technology working. So I'm really glad to be here today and excited to talk about the things that I've been spending a lot of time on over the last few years. But first, just a little bit about me and why I'm here. I am a digital strategist. I've been doing web work in one capacity or another for over 20 years. And in that time, I've worked as the web lead at several small and mid-sized organizations and spent 7 years at an agency as the content and usability director. And for the last 4 years, I've been an independent consultant through my company, Tanzen, and yes, if you speak German, that is the word for dance. I am American, though I have a German heritage. I don't speak German. That's a fairly random translation, and it comes from the song I Hope You Dance, which has the line, when you get the chance to sit it out or dance, I hope you dance. And that is what I wish for all of us. So, anyway, back to the digital strategy stuff. 2 years ago, I wrote the book Designing Connected Content, Plan and Model Products for Today and Tomorrow. And I did that along with Mike Atherton. And that's what brings me here today to talk about what it means to design connected content and how the principles set forth in that book have been used in my consulting work and also by others who have attended talks and read the book and what I've learned since the book was published. So, designing connected content is really about making content make sense and building an understanding from the connections between the content and also to bring context to the surface. It's not about structuring content, though structured content is the heart of the framework. It is a layered and modular approach, a stack, to borrow a technical term. In the structured content stack, the domain and content models provide the underlying structure. The content provides examples that illustrate the structure, and the interface provides a way to interact with the content. It's design that comes from the bottom up. You can change the interface, and the structure of the content remains the same. Add a new way to deliver or publish content, and you're ready without having to adjust everything or redo everything. You have a faster time to market when there is new technology. You can update your visual branding with a simple swap of the CSS, and suddenly the world sees the new version of your organization. You get the idea. It's not just the separation of presentation and content, though. So let's walk through what each of these layers looks like. So it starts with building an understanding of the domain you work in. What is the subject area in which your organization operates? Quite possibly, it's more than one. The bigger you are, the more you're doing, the more domains you have. So doing some work to map out the concepts in the domain and how they relate to each other provides the context for everything else you do. So here's an example of a domain model. It's evolved. This specific one for live music has evolved since it first appeared in the book. And it's done that because I've used this in workshops over the last couple of years. And each time people find new things like instrument and equipment that need to be part of the domain. So you can see that while this is pretty stable, there are things that change, and also one person cannot think of everything. So this is a group exercise. So once you've agreed on the domain and its shape, you can turn your attention to what parts of the domain your organization wants to expose as content types. So the content model is a representation of the types of content you want to create, their attributes, and the relationships between them. So here is a slightly distorted example of the content model for a ticket seller, which drew from the domain model. And I say slightly distorted because somehow between the last time I opened this and this time, all the lines disappeared. So I'll get that fixed before we send out the slides today for this. But the reason I call this a content model for ticket seller is because perhaps bands and music venues might use the same domain model because they're in the business of live music, but they would have different content types that they want to expose. So this is not a database or CMS specifications. It does resemble entity relationship diagrams that software developers use, and that really is the origin of this. But at this point, what we're doing is aiming for good enough structure to start doing something with it. We don't need to have perfect database and data structure. We'll get to that eventually. So we're in the content layer now, and this is where we start by designing the content. So we want to match user needs to the content types and prioritize the attributes of each type to meet the user's needs. We assemble the content as resources. So think of them as stand-ins for the thing itself. A performance by a band, details about the venue where the performance is held. When you take those things out of context of a website or a product or an app, you can represent it in many different ways. The things about the instance, like a performance, stay the same, whether it's on a website, an app, or spoken by a voice assistant, or it takes place live and is the real thing. I do this work using what I call content sheets. They combine the UX part, which is at the top where I have it labeled as determining core content. This comes from the core model worksheet as created by NetLife agency in Norway many years ago. And since discovering that, I've used it for pretty much every project I've done. So that has become key to success in designing connected content for me. And then we also then lay out the structure for delivery. So this part at the bottom is called core content. So we take the core content that we define in the top part, and we answer all the questions below using the content types and attributes from our model. So this is just a sample. You can only fit so much on a slide and make it readable. So you can get this as a Google Doc as a template at this URL here. Again, you'll see this in the slides afterwards. So finally, we're getting to where most people start, the interface or interfaces, as is more often the case these days. We do this through templates for the content to be delivered to a screen, APIs, or whatever way the content needs to flow to a person or a computer. We start with semantic HTML and layer other scripting and coding and style sheets on top of it as needed for the functionality and usability for the interface. Navigation is our top level, and this is much more than just site menus. Menus are only one way to navigate through content, but with all of this content underneath, we just need to organize, arrange, and contextualize it for the person who wants the information, as well as the robots who are coalescing it and parsing it for AI and machine learning. We leave behind hierarchical sitemaps because the models are the real maps. There are too many ways into it through information these days to be limited to a linear structure. So by providing many pathways through information, we allow the user to essentially choose their own adventure. So that's the theory. Reality is always much messier. So let's turn to the practical now. How has this been used? So the idea of domain and content modeling in this way originated with some really smart folks at the BBC in the early 2000s as a way to revamp its digital publishing strategy. So it's not breaking news to everyone, but the book has helped more people adapt their approach to digital product design. So one of my clients used it to create a new domain that they wanted to bring to the world. Their domain model helped them define the domain as well as what we called the hooks to more well-known domains that would connect the people who were looking for something different to them through their content. So they were able to take their domain model, make it into a content model, and they're using it for their product and as well as their marketing website and education and all the things that you have to do to attract people to your product. So I helped another client create some domain and content models that will connect all their disparate products in the background for more efficient operations and to establish a create once, publish everywhere mentality and reality. The work we did there were pilots for work that would eventually scale. So that's one of the things I'll get to at the end is starting small. So we have that. And then yet another client, a small manufacturing company, sees modeling as a way to help it expand to be the global leader in their niche. And publishing with structured content is an efficient way to scale their content as a company grows and continually adds products, product lines, and industries that it serves. So to me, the domain model is part of the branding work. It sets you up for finding opportunities that go beyond selling products. For example, one person used the domain model with a luxury sunglass company to discover that they are really in the fashion business. And by connecting the brand to fashion through their content, they could attract more people than simply marketing and selling their products. So simply by deliberately defining your domain, your horizons expand. So let's just look at a few well-known companies and see what domains they're in. So Nike, they're not really in the shoe business. They're in the business of athletes. They want to make everyone an athlete, and they do all kinds of things to support that. Disney, Disney is a multi-dimensional company, but they're really about magical experiences. Then we have our sunglass company is in the fashion business. And then a last one of someone that I had talked to is a company that sells sailboats and has a sailing school. They're not in the sailboat sales business, but they're really in two domains, the domain of sailboats itself and sailing education. So just by thinking about it this way, you can go from thinking about what software do we need to register people for classes to what information do people want to learn so that they want to learn how to sail and what can we provide them. So the domain model, which doesn't take a long time to do, can cause huge shifts in how an organization thinks about itself. All right, I'm going to go through one case study as super fast about how one of my clients went from just a PDF to an interactive website. So we didn't have to redesign everything. This is just one part of their website. So we started with a PDF, and then we created a content model that had these 5 content types. And that really helped us see that, oh, the core of their content were best practices. And everything else really had to do with that. That was what the members needed to be able to do their work better. That was what this organization did best. So then we moved to content sheets and really started figuring out, okay, wait, does this content make sense as the way we've done it? We moved through this pretty quickly because things weren't making sense at every step of the way. And then we did some sketching about how this would work. We updated the content sheets to match that, and then eventually got a website. This is the homepage, and you can see this online. It's just in a little tiny part of it. But you can see here on the homepage that best practices are the forefront of here, where they would not have been without the model. And then here's a best practice page. We have description process. We have all these other things. This is the top of the left screenshot is the top, the right screenshot's the bottom, and it's easily related because we've tagged everything. So before writing the book, really before Mike and I put our heads together to form this end-to-end process, I had been working from the content layer on up. I hadn't been doing the modeling. And if I could go back and redo most of the work that I did before then, I really would. But you can't do that. So as much of what I did was the structured content, but things just make so much more sense now that I've been doing at least a content model. I don't do domain models as much with my clients, but I'm starting to shift that as well. So the things that I've learned since doing this full process is, I mean, this isn't really news to anyone. Every project is different. There's different people, different timelines, different budgets, and not one of them is perfect. I don't even know what perfect would look like. You must stay flexible. Be prepared to go back and forth between people and documentation and continually adjust things as you gain perspective and context for eventual use. Be patient. For most people, this is a totally upside down way of working. It's different than they've done a website or product design before. So start small, educate them along the way, and accept that not everyone thinks the same way as you do. Perfection, as we all know, is our enemy. At every step, you're aiming for good enough. So often people get bogged down in trying to think of everything possible about content types or the relationships in the model. Don't. Move on to the content design, move on to the UX and UI design to allow ideas to form and take shape. Nothing is set in stone. It is the web. We can change it with a click of a button. And bring others in. This is a truly collaborative process, an all play from start to finish. It will not work if you don't bring others in right away and keep them engaged at the points where they can contribute. This means other design team members, stakeholders, clients, executives, users. They all have a role to play. Give them a chance to help you. So that's what I have. I want to open the discussion. I think we have about 10 minutes left. So what thoughts or questions or ideas does this trigger for you?
So here we go. I hope that people will jump in while some on the call are hopefully building the courage. I'll just say thank you, Carrie. Thank you for this very well prepared update and introduction, also both to the topic, to your book, and the open sharing of your lessons learned. Anybody want to raise your hand and say something to Carrie? We have 10 minutes here for the Q&A. If you could please just introduce yourself and then we'll get started. So I could start with one. Breaking the ice here, Carrie.
Thank you.
So you said something along the lines, what was really interesting to me is this, things you've learned. And you said something in the intro before you had your 5 bullets. You said something like top down, bottom up, like like the different layers that you worked on. Could you elaborate a bit on that?
So the layer, so that goes back to the structured content stack.
Yes.
So the layers, you could take any of them out. You could do just a domain model. You could do
Hmm.
just the content design. You can change any one of them. Although if you change the domain model, that's going to ripple through. But the domain, the reason that's at the bottom is it's the most stable.
Hmm.
Um, and it's truth. It's the things that exist in the world, and that doesn't change very often, or at
Hmm.
least it shouldn't. So you can do that. So each layer is less stable, which is why the navigation is at the top, because everybody comes to the app or the product or the site uses it slightly differently. So that's constantly changing every time something is used.
Hmm.
But you can make changes there. You could change your menus, and everything else stays the same because
Hmm.
what I didn't get into is URLs are mapped to the model, not the site hierarchy, which means they're much more stable.
Hmm.
Um, so yeah, so it's a take start anywhere, and move through it however you need to. It's the other thing is, I presented this as a linear process. It is
Hmm.
not. There's a lot of squiggly lines, a lot of going back and forth. So don't take that as a you must go through it this way.
Hmm.
This is just a framework.
All right. We have the next question here from our Norwegian friend Arild. Good to have you on the call. He asked that, Carrie, you've stated before that you think content strategy documents are dead. Can you elaborate on that?
So I'm assuming he means like an actual, here's a content strategy and here's a 50-page report of what your content strategy should be. Um, and the reason I say that is nobody reads those. I prefer to go along and document the decisions that have been made at every point. Clearly, there's a lot more to content strategy than what I've presented here today. There's lots of stuff from content strategy and user research and uh, web design and all kinds of and software development that get meshed in with everything here. But really, if you have your domain model documented and your content model documented and your content sheets, and there's a bunch of other documentation and artifacts that I create throughout the process, it's more nimble. People pay attention to it. It's easy to refer back to them. And also, people have participated. People who need to understand the content model have participated in creating it. I find when I was creating content strategy documents, um, they were I would write them, they were handed over to a client, and I don't know what happened to them after that. We kind of referred to them during the rest of a web project, and that was it. I really think they never went back to it afterwards. So that's what I mean by that. I think we just need to be more nimble and have a lots of smaller documentation that we can refer to over and over.
All right. So sounds like some of these content strategy documents were perhaps famous consultants' deliverables that nobody looked at later.
Yeah,
Uh,
exactly.
there's a new thing happening that perhaps you could relate to this or tell us how it's not related. This new, relatively new buzzword of content operations. Could you share some thoughts on how you see this fitting in, or just in general, your thinking on content operations?
Yeah. So the way I think about content operations is getting the people, processes, and technologies aligned so that you can be more efficient in your production and more effective in your delivery. And also effective and efficient in managing the content, because once it's published, you can't just publish and forget it. And that's so often a people problem and a process problem, not a technology problem, though we usually start with technology and expect that to fix all of our problems. But I'm looking at content operations as a way to kind of solve the problem of constant redesigns or content being published and never being read because no one knows why they published it or how it needs to be maintained. So I think it's a gap that has been missing, and as it becomes more talked about, hopefully more people will get on board and be more effective in their content work.
All right. Thank you very much. I know we have Blair and Richard from Contentful also on the line. Gentlemen, any reflections from your side? Let's see who unmutes first.
Hey, hi, it's Richard from Contentful.
Thank you.
Do you hear us?
Yes.
Do you hear us?
Yes, we do.
Okay, I have a question. Like, when you work like in a like you have a certain domain model set up and you have content types, sometimes you need variation for content that is very specific to a certain design or a certain delivery channel. How would you like embody that in this kind of process?
Mhm. So usually, oftentimes when we get to that representation layer, we will sometimes go back and um, add things to the content model. There's an echo. I don't know. Can you mute
Yeah, there's an
yourself?
echo. I think that maybe Richard or Blair, if you could go back on mute, I think will be better.
Yeah, that's it. So yeah, so I sometimes will add things back to the content model, and also the content model and the content types only account for, I say, about 80 to 90% of any pages in a given interface. And so you have to find ways to deal with that, whether it's depending on your CMS, a standard web page or some other template that really is unique to the interface itself, like about pages, terms and conditions, stuff like that, or even a standard type of landing page. If it becomes standard enough that you need it across interfaces, I add it to the model. Otherwise, not so much. One thing that usually does get added to the model often is a blog post, because that's an editorial thing, but it's not necessarily part of how people think about how they get content, but it certainly is a content type. So there's lots of different ways to deal with that, and yeah, you have to evolve things as they come and make sure that you're thinking about them holistically and not just adding a bunch of things because you felt like it.
All right. I think we're right on time, Carrie. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you very
Thank
much
you.
for taking the call, for preparing all of this.
And thank you for having me. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. That's it for this call. We'll share the notes as usual and the slides. You'll get them as well. And as you can see here on the final slide, there's also how you can reach Carrie. Thank you once again. And the next one's coming up on accessibility in October. If you have any ideas for future calls, please just let me know. And that's it for now. Bye now.